The black smoke rose from what used to be a homestead 3 miles back, where the Kansas Trail met Wyoming territory. Margaret Blackwood kept her eyes forward, but her 8-year-old daughter Emma saw it all. The burnt timbers, the scattered bones of cattle, the way the crows circled like they owned the sky. Her 5-year-old son Thomas pressed his face into her coat fingers, white where they gripped the wagon bench. The borrowed rig creaked with each rut. Its driver, a boy no older than 16, kept clearing his throat like he might speak then, thinking better of it. Margaret's hands were bleeding through the torn gloves, but she held those reins like letting go meant drowning. 6 days since they'd put dirt over Samuel's coffin. 6 days since the bankman stood in her doorway, with papers that made her children orphans in all but name. The letter she'd sent to Samuel's old regiment friend had gone into the wind, but Cole Harrison's ranch was the only coordinate she had left. If he turned them away, she'd already spotted a grove of cottonwoods where they could shelter, where the children might not see her finally break. The land opened up ahead, fence lines straight as judgment cattle dark against the browning grass, smoke rising proper from a stone chimney. A rider moved along the far pasture, his horse cutting through the herd like he was born to it. Margaret pulled her mother's cameo from her pocket, the one thing the bank hadn't known about, and tucked it deep in her boot. Emma watched everything with those sharp eyes that missed nothing already, learning what it meant when grown folks hid things. The rider turned toward them. Even at distance, Margaret could see the controlled way he moved like a man who'd learned not to waste motion. The war did that to men, made them either reckless or careful. Cole Harrison looked like the careful kind. He met them where the road forked, his bay mare steady under him despite the strangers. Dark hair needed cutting, jaw needed shaving, but his eyes were clear gray, watching her children first, then the sorry state of her horse, then finally meeting her gaze. "Mrs. Blackwood," not a question. "Mr. Harrison." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I wrote you about—" Letter never came. He swung down from the saddle smooth as water. "But you're here anyway." Emma's hand found her mother's sleeve. Thomas hadn't looked up yet, still pressed into her side like he could disappear. "We can sleep in your barn," Margaret said quickly. "Just until I find work in town. We won't—" "No." The word hung there. Margaret's chest went tight. "No woman sleeps in my barn," Cole said, already lifting Thomas down from the wagon, the boy too surprised to resist. "There's beds inside and hot food. We'll sort the rest later." Emma climbed down on her own chin, high, watching Cole like she was taking his measure. He offered her his hand anyway. She didn't take it, but she didn't back away either. Margaret's legs nearly buckled when her boots hit the ground. 3 days of riding, sleeping rough, rationing the last of their cornbread. Cole's hand steadied her elbow, brief and careful. "I don't take charity," she managed. "Good, I don't give it." He was already leading her horse toward the barn. "What I've got is a ranch that needs more hands than I have, and you look like someone who knows how to work." Inside the cabin, heat hit them like a blessing. Real furniture, not just crates and boards. A stove that didn't smoke. Cole pulled quilts from a chest, thick ones that smelled like cedar and safety. "The bed's yours and the children's," he said. "I'll take the barn loft." "That's not the Rikishon." "It's April, Mrs. Blackwood. Still cold at night. Your boy's already shivering." He was right. Thomas stood by the firearms, wrapped around himself, trying to be brave. Emma had found a shelf of books, her fingers tracing the spines like they were treasure. That night, after beans and biscuit, after Cole had carved a tiny horse from a piece of kindling for Thomas, after Emma had fallen asleep clutching a book about birds, Margaret stood at the window watching snow begin to fall. "You didn't ask what happened," she said to Cole's reflection in the glass. "You'll tell me when you're ready. My husband thought he could make something from nothing. The bank thought different." Cole moved to stand beside her, not touching, just present. "Samuel was a good man. Talked about you and the children in every letter. He talked about you too. Said you saved his life at Shiloh. We saved each other." Cole's voice went quiet. "That's what soldiers do." The snow was falling harder now, covering the wheel ruts, covering their tracks, covering everything that had brought them here. "Why help us?" Margaret asked. Cole was quiet long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Because I know what it's like to have nothing left but forward." Emma stirred in her sleep, mumbling something about birds. Thomas had curled against his sister, finally warm. Margaret felt something unknot in her chest just a little. "We'll earn our keep," she said. "I know you will." They stood there watching the snow erase the world outside, and Margaret thought maybe that was what she needed. Not just shelter, but erasure. a chance to start over as someone who wasn't just a widow, wasn't just desperate, wasn't just trying to survive until tomorrow. Cole moved toward the door, collecting his coat and rifle. Lock the door behind me. There's coffee for morning. The children can sleep late. Mr. Harrison. He turned at the door. It's Cole. And you're safe here, Margaret. That's not charity, that's a promise. The door closed soft behind him. Margaret stood there a long moment, then did something she hadn't done in weeks. She let her shoulders drop. She let the tears come. She let herself believe just for tonight that they might survive this. Outside, the snow kept falling, and somewhere in the barn, a good man made himself a bed in the hay, keeping watch through the night. The creek ran clear for the first time since winter, and Margaret learned to read the land by watching Cole's hands. How he tested fence posts with a push that looked gentle but wasn't. How he knew which calf would make it through spring and which needed extra grain. His fingers moved over everything with the same careful attention, bridle leather rifle stock, the fevered forehead of her son when Thomas took sick the third week. Just a cold, Cole said, but he stayed up all night anyway, feeding the fire while Margaret bathed her boy's face with cool cloths. Emma sat silent in the corner, that book about birds open on her lap, watching Cole like she was memorizing him. By morning, Thomas's fever broke. Cole was asleep in the chair, his hands still resting on the bed frame, like he'd been standing guard. Margaret covered him with a quilt and took the children outside to see the sunrise paint the mountains gold. He stayed, Emma said, not really asking. Yes, Papa wouldn't have. The words stung because they were true. Samuel had loved his children, but he'd loved his dreams more. Always chasing the next opportunity, the next sure thing, while Margaret held their life together with thread and prayer. They worked the ranch together as the days warmed. Cole taught Thomas to scatter chicken feed without spooking the hens. Emma learned to milk the gentlest cow, her small hands patient and steady. Margaret took over the kitchen garden, coaxing life from soil that hadn't been turned in years. My wife planted those roses, Cole said one evening, nodding toward the wild tangle growing against the barn. Margaret's hands stilled on the washboard. He'd never mentioned a wife. Fever took her. Winter of '78. He said it plain, like discussing weather. Baby, too. A girl. Emma looked up from her primer. What was her name? Sarah. The baby was going to be Anna. Thomas abandoned his carved horse to stand by Cole's knee. My papa's in heaven, too. I know, son. That night, Margaret found Cole standing by those roses, pruning shears in hand, but not cutting. She took them from him, gently showed him which canes were dead, which still held life. They worked until dark, their hands brushing as they reached for the same branch, neither pulling away. You ever think about leaving? She asked as they walked back to the house. Used to, every morning for 2 years. He opened the door for her. Then I figured out the hurt follows you anyway. Might as well stay where the work makes sense. She understood that. The way labor could fill the spaces where grief lived. How exhaustion was sometimes the only way to sleep. A rider came the next week, the sheriff from town badge, catching the light as he dismounted. Margaret's blood went cold. Had the bank sent men after them? Were there debts Samuel hadn't told her about? Cole stepped onto the porch, positioning himself between the sheriff and the door. Tom, Cole. The sheriff pulled off his gloves. Heard you had visitors. I have help. Mrs. Blackwood and her children are working the ranch with me. The sheriff's eyes found Margaret in the doorway. Mrs. Samuel Blackwood from Kansas. Yes. Your husband's creditors have been asking around. Seems he left quite a few debts. Margaret's hands found Emma's shoulders, holding her daughter steady. Or maybe holding herself steady. Samuel Blackwood's debts died with him, Cole said, voice flat. His widow owns nothing to nobody. That's not how the bank sees it. The bank can see it from a distance. This is my land. These are my workers. Anyone wanting different can discuss it with me. The sheriff studied Cole a long moment. You sure you want to make this your fight? Already have. They stood there, two men who'd known each other through things that didn't need naming. Finally, the sheriff nodded, swung back onto his horse. I'll tell them she headed north, maybe Montana. Appreciate it, Tom. After he left, Margaret sank onto the porch step, Thomas climbing into her lap, while Emma pressed against her side. We should go, Margaret said. I won't bring trouble to your door. Cole sat down beside them, close enough she could smell the leather and smoke on his clothes. You're not going anywhere. But if they come, then they'll find out what I learned in the war. I don't give up ground I've decided to hold. Emma looked up at him. You'd fight for us. I already am. That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She found Cole on the porch, rifle across his knees, watching the road. Yuri, you don't have to. Sit with me, he said, shifting to make room. She sat, pulling her shawl tight. The stars were sharp as glass overhead. Tell me about her, Sarah. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then she laughed at everything, even my terrible jokes. Said I was too serious, needed more joy in my life. He shifted the rifle. She was right. Samuel was all joy, Margaret said. No seriousness at all. I loved him for it until it cost us everything. We pick people who balance us. Then we lose them and have to learn balance alone. She turned to look at him. Is that what we're doing? Learning balance. Maybe. His eyes met hers. Or maybe we're learning something else. Before she could ask what Thomas's voice called from inside, frightened by dreams. Margaret rose to go to him, but Cole's hand caught hers just for a moment. You're not alone in this, he said. She squeezed his fingers, once then went to comfort her son, feeling the warmth of his touch all the way to her bones. The men came at dawn 3 weeks later, when the mist still clung to the grass and the cattle stood quiet in the fields. Margaret saw them first, 3 riders moving up the road with the deliberate pace of men who expected to be feared. Cole was in the barn. Emma was gathering eggs. Thomas played by the creek, just visible from the kitchen window. Margaret dried her hands on her apron, picked up the shotgun Cole had taught her to use, and stepped onto the porch. The lead rider had a face like winter, sharp and unforgiving. His suit was too fine for ranch country, his horse too pretty for real work. Mrs. Blackwood, I'm James Garrett, representing the First Kansas Bank. My husband is dead, Mr. Garrett. Your business died with him. Debts don't die, ma'am, they transfer. Cole emerged from the barn, moving with that dangerous quiet she'd seen in him before. Not hurried, but inevitable. He carried a pitchfork, but somehow made it look like a weapon. Gentlemen need something. Garrett's eyes flicked to Cole, calculating. This doesn't concern you, sir. Everything on my land concerns me. The second rider, younger and nervous, dropped his hand toward his pistol. Cole smiled, the kind of smile that made smart men reconsider. Mrs. Blackwood owes the bank $800, Garrett said. We're prepared to accept a payment arrangement. No. Margaret surprised herself by speaking. But standing there with Cole beside her and her children safe behind, something in her spine turned to iron. No? Garrett's eyebrows rose. I signed nothing. Samuel's name alone was on those papers. I owned no property, had no collateral, made no promises. She'd spent sleepless nights reviewing every document, every memory. You have no legal claim. We have moral claim. Your husband's word. My husband's word bought us seeds that didn't grow and land that couldn't hold water. His word left my children hungry. Her voice didn't shake. I'll give you the same thing his word is worth now. Nothing. Emma had appeared on the porch, quiet as a ghost, the egg basket in her hands. Thomas ran up from the creek, muddy and oblivious, then froze when he saw the strangers. Garrett's face darkened. There are ways to collect debts that don't require legal standing. The pitchfork in Cole's hand shifted, casual but clear. You threatening this family? I'm stating facts. Here's another fact, Cole said. I know your type. Hired guns who think they're respectable because they work for banks instead of rustlers. But I've killed both kinds and they bleed the same. The nervous rider's horse danced sideways. Even the animal could feel the violence threading through the air. You're making a mistake, Garrett said. No. You made the mistake when you rode onto my land and threatened what's mine. Margaret's breath caught. What's mine? Not the land. Them. We'll be back, Garrett said. With more men. No, me, Cole said. You won't? Something in his voice made Garrett pause. Cole continued. Because I know who you are, James Garrett. I know about that incident in Topeka. The marshal's daughter. The payoff that kept you out of prison. Garrett went white. See, Mrs. Blackwood has friends too. The kind who remember things. The kind who write letters to federal marshals when bank agents overreach. The silence stretched like a held breath. Finally, Garrett wheeled his horse around. This isn't over. Yes, Cole said. It is. They watched the riders disappear into the distance. Thomas ran to his mother. Emma set down the eggs with shaking hands. Margaret lowered the shotgun, her knees suddenly weak. Cole's hand steadied her elbow. You did good. How did you know about Topeka? Tom's not just a sheriff. He's got friends who keep track of men like Garrett. He guided her to the porch step. Sit. You're shaking. She was. All the fear she'd held back came rushing through her now. Cole sat beside her, solid and warm, while the children pressed close. They could come back, she said. They won't. Men like that are cowards. They push until someone pushes back. Emma looked up at him. You were in the war. Not a question. The child saw everything. Yes. Did you kill people? Margaret started, but Cole held up a hand. Yes, he told the girl. When I had to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Emma nodded satisfied. Good. That afternoon, while the children napped exhausted from fear and relief, Margaret found Cole fixing the gate that had been threatening to fall all spring. You called us yours, she said. He didn't look up from his work. Did I? You know you did. He set down his hammer, turned to face her. Would you mind if I meant it? Her heart hammered against her ribs. Cole, I know it's too soon. I know you're still grieving. But Margaret, He stopped to start it again. This place has been empty for 3 years. Not just of people, of purpose. Then you arrived and suddenly I remember why I built it. She stepped closer. We're broken people. Broken things can mend, sometimes stronger than before. The children are already mine in every way that matters. It was true. Thomas followed him like a shadow. Emma had started calling him sir in that careful way that meant she was testing if she could call him something else. Margaret reached up, touched the scar on his jaw she'd been wondering about for weeks. How? Shrapnel and Tatum. Does it hurt? Not anymore. She understood he wasn't talking about the scar. That evening after supper, Cole did something unexpected. He got down on one knee in front of the children, man to man, serious. I need to ask you both something. Thomas's eyes went wide. Emma straightened, alert. Your mother means something to me. You two mean something to me. I'd like to court her proper if you'll allow it. Thomas looked confused. What's court? It means I want to marry her, Cole said simply, but not without your say. Emma and Thomas exchanged looks, having one of those wordless conversations only siblings could. Finally, Emma spoke. Would you be our father if you'd have me? Thomas launched himself at Cole's small arms, wrapping around his neck. Emma's approval came quieter. She took Cole's hand, studied it like she was reading his palm, then nodded. Margaret's eyes burned with tears she didn't try to hide. The fever came for Emma in late May, when the wildflowers had just started blooming, and the world seemed too beautiful for tragedy. One morning she was fine reading her bird book on the porch. By noon she was burning up delirious calling for her father, but whether she meant Samuel or Cole, nobody could tell. Margaret didn't leave her side for 3 days. Cole rode to town twice for the doctor who came and shook his head and said words like, wait and pray and prepare yourself. Thomas stood in the doorway, clutching his carved horse so tight the ears broke off. Is Emma going to heaven like Papa? Cole knelt beside him. Not if I can help it. But by the 4th night, even Cole's certainty cracked. Emma's breathing went shallow, rattling. Her skin felt like paper, dry and thin. Margaret held her daughter's hand and made bargains with God. Take me instead. Take everything. Just leave my children alone. Cole disappeared into the night. Margaret thought he'd gone to be alone with his grief. He'd lost a daughter once already. But he came back an hour later with an old Apache woman, her face mapped with years and wisdom. This is Mary Crow, he said. She helped birth half the children in the territory. She knows things the doctor doesn't. Mary took one look at Emma and started giving orders. Build the fire hotter. Boil water with willow bark. Get me whiskey and clean cloth. She worked through the night pressing herb-soaked cloths to Emma's chest, spooning bitter tea between the girl's cracked lips. She sang in a language Margaret didn't recognize, low and rhythmic, like calling someone back from far away. Just before dawn, Emma's fever broke. Not gradually, but all at once, like winter releasing its grip. She opened her eyes, truly seeing for the first time in days. Mama, Margaret sobbed, clutching her daughter. Cole's hand found her shoulder steadying. Thomas crawled onto the bed, pressing against his sister. Even Mary Crow smiled, gathering her supplies. She'll live, the old woman said, but she'll be weak for weeks. No excitement, no hard work. Cole paid her in silver and a promise. Anything you need anytime. After Mary left, they sat around Emma's bed like it was an altar. The morning sun slanted through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, and Margaret thought she'd never seen anything so beautiful as her daughter's eyes alert and alive. I heard Papa, Emma said weakly. Margaret's chest tightened. Samuel! No. Emma looked at Cole. You said you wouldn't let me go to heaven. Cole's voice came out rough. That's right. Good, I'm not ready. I haven't finished my bird book. They laughed, exhausted, relieved, slightly hysterical laughter that felt like breaking and healing at the same time. But the peace didn't last. A week later, while Emma was still recovering, the sheriff rode up again. This time his face was grim. "Cole, we got a problem." Margaret stood from the garden dirt on her hands. "Garrett?" "No, ma'am. Indians. A band of young bucks broke from the reservation. They've been hitting ranches north of here. Stole cattle, burned the miller's barn." Cole checked his rifle. "How many ye?" "Maybe 6, maybe 8. Hot-headed kids, mostly angry about the reservation conditions." "Can't say I blame them," Cole said. Tom shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe not, but folks are forming a posse. They're talking about riding to the reservation, teaching them all a lesson. That's murder talk." "I know. That's why I'm here. You've got pull with both sides. The whites respect you, and Mary Crow's word carries weight with her people." Cole looked at Margaret. She read the question in his eyes. "Go," she said. "Stop this before it becomes a massacre." He touched her cheek, brief but tender. "Bar the door. Keep the shotgun close. We'll be fine." But after he rode off with Tom, the ranch felt exposed. Every shadow could be a threat. Every sound made Margaret reach for the gun. Night fell black and moonless. Thomas slept curled against Emma, who was still too weak to do more than sit propped against pillows. Margaret paced, watching the windows. The horses screamed first. Then came the orange glow from the barn. Margaret grabbed the shotgun, but when she looked out, her blood froze. 4 men, maybe 5, moving between the buildings. Not Indians, their silhouettes were wrong. These were white men, and she recognized the shape of one. Garrett. He hadn't gone away. He just waited for Cole to leave. "Mrs. Blackwood," his voice carried across the yard. "Come out and we'll make this quick. The debt can be paid in trade. This land for what you owe." Margaret checked the shotgun. 2 shells. Cole had more ammunition, but it was in the barn that was now burning. Mama Emma's voice, thin and scared. "Stay down, both of you, under the bed." But, Durasuri. Now, the children scrambled to hide. Margaret positioned herself by the window, trying to count Shadow's plan angles. She could take 2 men maybe, but not 5. Glass shattered in the back room. Someone had thrown a torch through the window. Smoke began filling the house. "Time's up," Garrett called. Margaret made a choice. She stepped onto the porch, shotgun raised. "Let my children leave safely, then we can discuss terms." Garrett smiled in the firelight. "You're hardly in a position to negotiate. I've got 2 shells and good aim. You'll be the first to die. Your men might get me after, but you'll be dead. That worth $800. His smile faltered. Then from the darkness beyond the burning barn came a sound that chilled everyone's blood. A war cry, high and fierce. Arrows whistled through the air. One of Garrett's men screamed, clutching his shoulder. The Apache boys Tom had warned about, but they weren't attacking the ranch. They were attacking Garrett's men. "Indians!" someone shouted, and panic erupted. In the chaos, Margaret saw him, Cole emerging from the smoke like vengeance itself, rifle cracking. Tom beside him, and Mary Crow, of all people, directing the Apache youth with sharp commands in their language. The fight was brief and brutal. Garrett tried to run, but Cole caught him, drove him to the ground with a blow that had years of rage behind it. "You came for my family," Cole said, pressing his knee into Garrett's back. "That was your last mistake." Tom already had the others in irons. The Apache boys melted back into the darkness. Later, Margaret would learn Cole had found them, first convinced them to help defend the ranch in exchange for supplies, and his word that no posse would hunt them. The barn was lost, but they'd saved the horses. The house needed repairs, but would stand. And Garrett would hang for arson and attempted murder. Tom would see to that. As dawn broke, they stood in the yard surveying the damage. Emma and Thomas clung to Margaret's skirt, safe but shaken. Cole's shirt was torn, blood on his knuckles, soot in his hair. "It's over," he said. Margaret looked at the burnt barn, the damaged house, the land that had cost so much to keep. "Is it worth it, all this trouble?" Cole pulled her close, children and all. "You're worth it. This family is worth any fight." Mary Crow, who'd stayed to help, snorted. "Men, always making everything about fighting. This one," she pointed at Margaret. "She held off 5 men with 2 shells and mother's courage. That's the real victory. By September, you couldn't tell there'd been a fire unless you knew where to look. The new barn stood taller than the old one, raised in a single week by neighbors who came from miles around. Word had spread about the widow who'd stood against the bank men, the rancher who'd prevented a massacre, the Apache woman who'd brought warriors to defend white children. The story had grown in the telling, as stories do, but the heart of it was true. Sometimes different kinds of people could stand together against wrong. Emma was strong again, brown from the sun, helping with the fall harvest. She'd started writing down the Apache words Mary Crow taught her, adding them to her bird book, because she said birds don't care what language you speak. Thomas had grown 2 inches and lost his fear of the dark. He worked beside Cole every day, learning the rhythm of ranching, the patience it took to build something that would last. And Margaret had stopped looking over her shoulder. The wedding was small, just family and the friends who'd become family. Tom stood as witness. Mary Crow sang a blessing in Apache and English both. Emma carried late-blooming wildflowers, and Thomas held the ring's simple bands Cole had made from melted silver dollars. "I don't have much to offer," Cole said when he slipped the ring on Margaret's finger. "Just work-rough hands and a heart that's been broken and mended crooked." "I don't need perfect," Margaret replied. "I need real. I need someone who stays." "Then you have me, always." They kissed while Thomas made disgusted noises, and Emma rolled her eyes and everyone laughed because joy had finally found its way back to this land. That night, after the guests had gone and the children were asleep, Margaret and Cole sat on the porch watching the stars. The night was crisp autumn coming on fast, but Margaret wasn't cold. Not with Cole's arm around her, his warmth seeping through. "I never thanked you," she said. "For what?" "For seeing us. Not seeing a widow and orphans who needed saving, but seeing a family worth fighting for." He was quiet a moment. "You saved me too. This place was just walls and work before you came. Now it's home." A coyote called in the distance. One of the horses nickered in response. The ordinary sounds of a life they'd built together. "Samuel would have liked you," Margaret said. "You think?" "He always said I needed someone steadier, someone who could be the rock while I was the river." Cole kissed her temple. "What does that make the children, the future we're building it all for?" Winter came early that year, but they were ready. The barn was full of hay. The root cellar stocked the house tight against the wind. Cole had taught Margaret to shoot properly, not just the shotgun, but his rifle too. She'd taught him to laugh again, to play silly games with the children, to see joy in small things like Thomas's first successful rope throw or Emma's perfect recitation of bird calls. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell soft outside and the fire crackled warm inside, Emma stood from her place by the tree they'd decorated with paper stars and dried berries. "I want to say something." Everyone turned to her, this serious girl who saw everything, remembered everything. When Samuel died, I thought we'd never be happy again. I thought we'd always be running, always be scared." She looked at Cole. "But you made us safe. You didn't have to. We weren't yours. But you chose us anyway." Cole's eyes glistened. "Emma, I'm not done." She took a breath. "I want to call you Papa, if that's okay, because Samuel was my father by birth, but you're my father by choice. And that means something too." Thomas jumped up. "Me too. Can I call you Papa too?" Cole couldn't speak. He just opened his arms and the children flew into them, and Margaret watched her family, her real chosen, fought for family, embraced by firelight. Later, much later, when the children were asleep and the snow had stopped falling, Margaret found Cole standing by the window, looking out at the land they'd nearly lost, the land they'd claimed through courage and stubbornness and love. "What are you thinking?" He turned to her. "That broken things really do mend stronger. That sometimes you have to lose everything to find what matters. That I'm the luckiest man in the territory." She moved into his arms. "We're the lucky ones." "No," he said, holding her close. "We're just too stubborn to quit." She laughed against his chest. "Is that what we're calling it? That or love? They look about the same from here." Outside, the moon came out from behind clouds, painting the snow-covered land silver. Inside, a family that had been forged from loss and tempered by trial settled in for the night, complete and whole and home. The carved horse Thomas had broken in his sister's fever had been repaired, its ears glued back crooked but strong. It sat on the mantel next to Emma's bird book and Margaret's mother's cameo, the one she'd hidden in her boot that first day, and Cole's silver dollar, the one he'd kept from his first cattle sale. Small things, ordinary things. But together they told the story of how strangers became family, how a house became a home, how love could grow even in the hardest ground if you were brave enough to plant it, patient enough to tend it, and stubborn enough to see it through. Spring would come again. It always did. And when it arrived, they'd be ready, not because they had no more battles to fight, but because they'd face them together. Margaret and Cole, Emma, and Thomas, maybe more children in time. A family built not from perfection, but from the choice to stay, to fight, to hope, to love, despite all the reasons not to. The old roses by the barn, Sarah's roses, had survived the fire. Come May, they'd bloom again, wild and tough and beautiful. Margaret would tend them, and Cole would watch her work, and the children would play in their shadow, and life would go on the way it does when you've earned your happiness one difficult day at a time. That's how the best stories end, not with grand gestures or perfect solutions, but with ordinary people choosing each other again and again, building something worth keeping in a world that tries to take everything away. The ranch thrived, the family grew, and love, stubborn and scarred and stronger for its trials, put down roots as deep as the mountains, as lasting as the land itself.